I'm not saying cannibalism should be allowed, but yeah, stop talking. Just stop there. I'm not saying Bill Cosby is a saint, but no.
All right, we'll go on from there. I thought there was another little bit on it. So I use that clip because I think it very much, whether it's Trump or someone else, very much illustrates that idea of the media requiring drama and thus the political process being skewed towards performers, towards groups that will provide a sort of a maximum of drama, a maximum of attack ads and so forth, both paying for advertising and so forth. But then potentially, because of that, it can very much skew the public perception if what the information we're getting is about. So, for example, in the Trump example, the media information we got, the amount of stuff that was on Trump and the amount of hours on all of the networks that were dedicated to Trump, even if some of them were quite negative, totally outshone everybody else. So potentially that idea, they estimated something like $2 billion of free media coverage over the course of the election. So it very much, the media is very much implicated in how these things work and who gets elected in the end. So, so we have an ever-increasing importance of the visual, focus on what kinds of candidates we can have, which are acceptable, looking at the increasing power of consultants and so sort of spin consultants, strategic communication consultants are commanding, the good ones are commanding higher and higher and higher salaries, but they're also having, therefore, a much bigger potential impact on what gets said and how the policies might shape out in consideration of what plays, what sells, and so forth. One of the other potential issues around the political donations thing is if you've got to collect a certain amount of money to pay for a certain number of ads, you're also spending a lot of time away from your electorate doing fundraising. There's been, I can't remember what it's called, there's quite a good documentary on that, that looks at the amount of time politicians have to spend raising money to get re-elected when they're meant to actually be doing their job in the Senate or in the House of Reps or whatever. And the role not just of that sort of direct advertising, but of popular culture more generally in terms of humanising candidates, whether it's a vlog of Trudeau and his wife, or someone appearing on Saturday Night Live or Seth Meyers or one of these shows to sort of poke gentle fun at themselves as a way of humanising them. There isn't really a divide now between political media and non-political media because the political figures, you know, still appear on Ellen and kind of get enmeshed in the popular culture. And there's more and more popular culture about politics all the time, more shows, more comedies and this sort of thing. The focus on fundraising and the focus on the idea of maintaining a certain kind of persona and so forth leads to a state of what we call the permanent campaign. So you will have noticed this if you ever watch politicians on the 7:30 report get interviewed. So they will just spend the whole time, they'll be asked a question and their answer will actually be, well, Labor or the Liberals did this, so clearly they're evil. I guess the idea is that even when you're not actually in an election campaign, you're still trying to make your own side look good and the other side look bad all the time in the media. in order to sort of build your brand and denigrate their brand. So that idea of the permanent campaign which is a problem because it leads to more of a focus on sort of point scoring than potentially actually doing what they need to be doing. And leads to a way to having to always set up quite oppositional positions, or at least find something to hate on in the other person's policies in order to say, no, they're wrong, they're wrong, they're wrong, rather than necessarily sort of arguing more on the policy. So there's various kinds of, like genres, elections have specific narratives, and these are usually put forward in the ads. These are just some examples. There are definitely more. But the politician XYZ is just like you, was mentioned earlier. And this is a very common one. You know, Pauline Hanson, David Leyonhjelm, I don't exactly know how to pronounce his name. I've only ever read it. Often the outsider candidate wants to present that they're just like you in some way that the others aren't. And that's a sort of a powerful narrative, because even if it doesn't pick up you, it might pick up someone else who is more like that. Probably the most popular one is the other side is evil narrative. And that's when you, and this is the sort of permanent campaign thing, you just want to constantly be proving that the other side is evil in one way or another. This can also focus on a particular single issue, so the so-called Mediscare campaign, the idea that Turnbull would get rid of Medicare or shut it down or diminish it in some way. This person has an amazing plan to make everything better is actually less common than the more negative ones, but can be very persuasive. So if you look at the American situation, Bernie Sanders certainly presented himself as having a plan that would make America better. Donald Trump presented as having a plan that would make America better. So that can be very persuasive, but it doesn't always work in that respect. Can you guys think of any other kinds of narratives?
Big business versus local and small town.
Yep. Yep. So sort of counterposing two groups and sort of letting them fight it out in a way. Yeah. Yeah. We care about you is a very important one, and I think at heart, I think that's one of those ones, it has to be in there. It's like a central discursive framework, but then it's then divided in, we care about you, so we're going to make you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, or we care about you, so we're going to provide you with these sorts of things. That's where it then, I guess, starts to branch off.
Let's make and then blank great again.
Yes. Let's make blank great again. I think there should be hats for that. Make this. So, which is essentially appealing to the past and saying there was a great Australia and now we are no more a great Australia, which is a way, because you can't actually criticise Australia, because, or you can't criticise America or Canada, because ultimately that makes you seem unpatriotic. But if you go, oh, we were the greatest nation on earth and now we're not, then it doesn't make you seem unpatriotic, it makes you seem more patriotic, that you kind of go back. Yeah? Other thoughts? So, I mean, if you think about it, obviously there's lots of different kinds of campaigns, but most of them will fall into a couple of these sort of individual narratives, these stories that are being told about what's going on or about what should be going on, potentially. that are ultimately speaking to who we are, saying, I'm like you because you are XYZ, because I'm like you implies that you know who you is. So it's situating who we are, where, small business, we're this, we're this, we're this. But also appealing then to who we want to be, make us great again. So ultimately, we looked at national identity in week 3, and all of these ads and all of these things appeal to the idea of a cohesive nation, that there is one Australia that you're talking to, that you're appealing to, that you're going to help in some way. But all it actually does, essentially, is reveal the divisions in who we actually are and what we actually think is important. So I will skip this one. Another very important election narrative, and this, I guess, also harkens back to the idea of harkens back to some of the things we talked about in terms of representation, is the creation of an other. If you want to unite Australia or America or wherever, what better way than to contrast us to a group that is made out to be entirely different? So you can create those binaries of the good and the bad. So Mexican immigration certainly played that role in the latest US election. So the idea that you sort of set up a good and a bad, and we've got to keep the bad out. There was a, you guys probably don't remember this, but there was a children overboard scandal of John Howard, refugees and so forth, just before an election that helped him get in, like his second or third term, I think. And I guess the idea here is you can create unity artificially, even though your population is not united and are widely diverse, through creating an other of some kind. And this has of course been used in lots of different historical contexts of kind of blaming a group for something. So what I find very, creating an other in terms of race and immigration and all these sorts of things, very, very common. What was interesting in the latest US election is that, and this seems counterintuitive, the Trump campaign made the media into an other. So the attacks and the we're this and you're this and they're those other people was very much focused on, so this was done sort of performatively. So at the rallies, they'd make a little sort of a pen in the middle and put all the journalists in there and then point at the journalists. And so Trump would have a section of the rally where he'd point at the journalists and go, these are the people who are tricking you. This is the evil liberal media. They're going to do this. They're going to lie to you, et cetera, which was apparently very scary for the journalists, which I can imagine. And this is, I guess, still, I mentioned before that idea of enemy of the people and those sorts of statements. It is the media that gets people elected, but you're creating an other of the media so that people won't believe what they read in the media. And we'll talk about that more next week in terms of this idea of fake news and post-truth. But I want to leave you with that that thought of what happens if the media, which is the thing that informs us about politics becomes an other to politics. Potentially, maybe good, maybe bad, but I guess a very unusual and complex thing to happen, or to be on its way to happen. So we will go. We will talk a bit more about datification next week, but I just want to touch on the idea that it's not just about what's going on in the media as if there is one media, but what everything has found is that their media is increasingly partisan. So, you know, the news comedy tends to be on the Liberal side, you know, Fox News and so forth tends to be on the other side, and you have, and even, you know, here the Daily Telegraph and the Australian print things from very different perspective to the Sydney Morning Herald or the Guardian. So we call this media bias, but we also talk about the idea of partisan news consumption. So if you're receiving news, and this is also influenced by social media, there was some research done on social media feeds, comparing different feeds according to what people were assumed to be based on their sort of cookies track record type stuff, and found that if you were considered to be on one side of the election, you were getting the same stories on Facebook, but from a completely different angle as people on the other side. So if society is broken into two groups, and they're both getting